unknown to the Delhi sultans. He provides a poetic view of court politics in his Tughlaqnama, composed in the 14th century, as a form of traditional history. His study of astronomy, however, underlining a heliocentric universe, distanced him from orthodox Islam, as it implied questioning accepted truths. And it was his poetry and musical compositions that gave him a popular status, such that sultans and the orthodox thought it better not to antagonize him. A few centuries later, Eknath in Maharashtra also questioned the control exercised by formal religion. His versions of the Bhagavad Puran and the Ramayana defined his Brahmanical scholarship. This did not stop him from questioning the viability of the social order and caste practices. Turning to modern times, the ideology of nationalism made attempts to reorder society. Nationalism opposed colonialism, but was not averse to theories from colonial scholarship. Social reform movements pertaining to upper caste Hinduism, such as the Brahmo Samaj, the Prarthana Samaj, and the Arya Samaj, suggested new forms of Hindu religious organization and the role of caste. We are all familiar with Raja Ram Mohan Roy and socio-religious reform, but so little is said about his exact contemporary in Tanjore, Sarfoji II, a minor Maratha ruler. He questioned orthodoxy by focusing on the content of education. His reading of Enlightenment authors convinced him that knowledge was based on processes of reasoning and that these were taught through education. The schools he established were intended for this purpose, as were the books and the objects that he collected in the famous Saraswati Mahal library. Although these movements were not intended to critically question the intellectual traditions, this did occasionally surface. Despite the centrality of caste hierarchies legitimized by religion, the interface between religion and caste was seldom investigated. In the 19th century, Bal Gangadhar Tilak supported the Aryan foundations of Indian civilization and upper caste culture, even if, according to him, the Aryans did have to trek all the way from the Arctic homeland to India. But Jyotirao Phule saw the coming of the Aryans as a logical explanation for the oppression of the lower castes. For him, the Aryans were Brahmins that oppressed the indigenous inhabitants, who were the Shudras. Tilak extended the accepted view. Phule questioned it to explain existing society. Both readings were historically faulty, but Phule was asking an incisive question. There were others who were also questioning the legitimacy of caste and doubting Brahmanical beliefs. Periyar or Ediyar, although not an academic, was known to be as well read as were his academic colleagues. He was critical of the contradictions in Hindu mythology and beliefs that he always dismissed as fabrications of the Indo-Aryan peoples. His rationalism led him to take a strong position in favor of social equality, and more particularly the equality of women. The people that I have mentioned were not public intellectuals in the modern sense. They were among those who questioned the existing reality as a means of attaining an improved society. They were listened to because they were respected in their diverse professions. The point is not the similarity or otherwise of their questions. It is the way in which they reasoned, even if the nature of the questions change in accordance with the issue of the moment. Such questions are not arbitrary. They have to be governed by acknowledged critical reasoning, and people who question were and are articulate at moments of significant historical change. Moments of historical change coincide with the exploration of new ways of ordering society, as has been happening off and on in the Indian past till now. Public intellectuals playing a discernible role are needed for such explorations, as also to articulate the traditions of rational thought in our intellectual heritage. This is currently being systematically eroded. Mainstream anti-colonial Indian nationalism, the kind that some of us grew up with, and the emergence of a liberal democracy aspiring to be secular, made space for the visible presence of the public intellectual. More than a few took on this role, especially in the years just after independence. They were responsible for wide-ranging debates. Later events, be it the emergency or the genocides of religious communities, heightened our awareness of the need for public intellectuals, if only to speak out and prevent a repetition of such events. We must remind ourselves that Nikhil and others like him strongly opposed forms of censorship and the attempt to silence alternate voices. Today we have specialists in various professions, but many among them are unconcerned with the world beyond their own specialization. It is sometimes said that they are replacing the public intellectuals, but the two are not identical. There are many more academics, for instance, than ever existed before, but it seems that most prefer not to confront authority, even if it debars the path of free thought. Is this because they wish to pursue knowledge undisturbed, or because they are ready to discard knowledge should authority require them to do so? Much has been written on trying to define the public intellectual. Such a person, it is assumed, should take a position independent of those in power, enabling him or her to question debatable ideas irrespective of who propagates them. Reasoned critiques are often the essential starting point. The public intellectual has to see herself or himself as a person who is as close to being autonomous as is possible, and more than that, to be seen by others as such. An acknowledged professional status makes it somewhat easier to be autonomous. The public intellectual of today, in addition to being of such a status, has at the same time a concern for what constitute the rights of citizens, and particularly in issues of social justice. And further, there is a readiness to raise these matters as public policy. A justification for the critique is the claim to speak for society and to claim a degree of moral authority. The combination of drawing upon wide professional respect, together with a concern for society, can sometimes establish the moral authority of a person and ensure public support. This is a conceded qualification and not a tangible one. In the past, it was those who had distanced themselves somewhat from society that were believed not to have ulterior motives in the changes that they suggested. But this was not always so.